Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jina Ri. I'm currently an assistant professor at the Catholic University of Korea. I'm teaching a general education courses at the Catholic College. Um, I'm teaching legal psychology, global business and legal issues, law and neuroscience, discrimination and conflicts in contemporary society. I'm very honored to be here. Thanks for having me today. During my undergrad years, I studied East Asian languages and cultures as major at UC Berkeley. And back then, I was very interested in East Asian languages, cultures, and immigrants and their fundamental rights and racial minority in the criminal justice system. And my dissertation during the PhD program was about the immigrants' fundamental rights and the utilization of social scientific evidence in the criminal court. So I did a research on the cross-cultural experts and also other experts in social linguistics. And later on, my interest got shifted toward the various types of syndrome evidence, such as battered woman syndrome, rape trauma syndrome, and also Tourette syndrome, under the broad category of social scientific evidence and expert witnesses. So first of all, I would like to tell you the definition or how the neurologists define the Tourette syndrome. Neurologically, Tourette's syndrome is characterized by uncontrolled movements and vocalizations, stuttering vocalizations. These are affected by other neurobehavioral conditions such as ADHD and obsessive compulsive disorder, which is often abbreviated as OCD. And Tourette syndrome patients, they do these ritual, repetitive behaviors. And certain behaviors, it's also called as tics, and they have distinctive features such as repetitive active muscle movements and or vocalizations. For instance, in terms of regarding the muscle movements, they do like blinking or like sniffing or humming, and the RAM of tic encompasses both muscle-related tics. And the vocal stuttering vocalization as well. So some of the patients who suffer from the Tourette syndrome, they hit themselves or they touch others. And the patients who suffer the Tourette syndrome and has vocal tics, they use swearing words, they use profanity, and those could be the examples of various symptoms that Tourette syndrome patients have. Unfortunately, until now, there is no single case that is directly related to the issue of Tourette syndrome and the criminal liability in South Korea. But the court considered in this one specific case, the court considered the tic disorder as a mitigating factor in sentencing. So I'm going to briefly introduce the facts of the case to you. So here's the facts of the case. The individuals in this case were identified as engaging in fraudulent activities, and they set up a call center within an apartment. And they ran so-called like phishing, voice phishing company in South Korea, and they committed fraud through the telephone communications. And interestingly, in this case, the defendant allegedly suffered from tic disorder, and he raised a defense of his Tourette syndrome, the tic disorder, and at the voice phishing company, his role was mainly collecting the information and verify personal information, including name, social security, and address, contact information, etc. And the court later articulated that the defendant's defense is valid as a mitigating factor in sentencing because he did not have any prior criminal record, and also he suffered from a long-term tic disorder. So the court actually concluded that the defendant's symptom, the tic disorder, could work as a mitigating factor in sentencing. And here's another case, the second case I want that I would like to share with you. This case is about high school students and bullying. In this case, the plaintiff filed a lawsuit against two defendants, who's also high school students, and the plaintiff sought compensation from the defendants, claiming that their bullying exacerbated the tic disorder and other psychiatric disorders such as the depression and other various psychological disorders. And in this case, the defendants frequently called the plaintiff as a psychopath and killer, like murderer. So the plaintiff got extremely distressed, and later on, the plaintiff got diagnosed with Tourette's tic disorder and the minor depression. The court in this case determined that the plaintiff is entitled to compensation from the defendants for any losses that had been incurred to the plaintiff as a result of the defendant's unlawful actions. So these two are, if you read my article, I shared more cases from South Korea that's related to the Tourette's syndrome and the criminal liability. But still, so far there's no single case that's directly related to the issue of the tic disorder and criminal liability. Okay, so there's one case about the Tourette's syndrome and the request for the registration of disability. And in this case, a plaintiff was diagnosed with Tourette's syndrome, and he had been receiving treatment for more than a decade. And he applied for the disability registration under Article 32 of the Disability Welfare Act. And unfortunately, the administrative agency, they declined the plaintiff's request for disability registration, stating that the plaintiff's impairment was not defined under the Article 2, Section 1 of the Enforcement Decree. So according to this the Article 2, Section 1 of the decree, it encompasses only individuals with visual impairment or hearing impairment, speech impairment, intellectual impairment, or autism, kidney impairment, heart impairment, but the Tourette syndrome was not included in the list, was not defined under the list of under the Article 2, Section 1. So the agency declined the request, and the plaintiff raised a claim against the decision. And the Supreme Court, in this case, the court stated that the administrative agency cannot reject an application for disability registration simply because particularly disability is not explicitly stipulated under the Article 2, Section 1, Article 2, Section 1 of the Enforcement Decree of the Disability Welfare Act. And the court further ruled that the plaintiff's request for the registration is valid in accordance to the equality principle of equality and the objectives of the law. So once again, the court stated that even if the specific symptom is not stipulated under the rule of law, in accordance with the objectives of law and the principle of equality, Tourette's syndrome in this specific case could be considered as the disability under the Article 2, Section 1. Interestingly, in 2021, approximately 1 year and 7 months after the court's decision, the Tourette's syndrome got included in the list under the Article 2, Paragraph 1, Section 1 of the Disability Welfare Act. However, it still needs to meet further requirements, criteria, conditions to meet the standard. So to summarize, there are currently no distinct specific rules on Tourette syndrome, tic disorder in South Korean criminal law, but there's still a possibility for the issue to be considered under the category of mitigation due to mental and physical incapability under the Article 10, Section 1, and Section 2 of the Korean Criminal Code. Unlike South Korea, in the United States and in other European countries, they have numerous criminal cases on the specific issue of the Tourette syndrome and tic disorder, or the defense of the Tourette syndrome. Specifically, I would like to introduce People versus Nelson case, which I delineated in my article. In People versus Nelson, Robert Nelson, who is a defendant in this case, he had a Tourette syndrome for more than 30 years, accompanied by the OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and he randomly dialed a number from a phone book and harassed the person with sexual statements, and he repeated this inappropriate action several times by calling the same person. The victim, she reported, and the police arrested him. In this case, the Nelson, he was unemployed and he received disability benefits due to his health conditions of the Tourette syndrome at the time of the trial proceedings. And he had been also diagnosed with the obsessive compulsive disorder at the age of 10. So he got diagnosed with the Tourette syndrome and OCD when he was 10 years old, and he continued to take the medication, prescribed medication, and also he was receiving the disability benefits from the government due to his health conditions. And he stated that he suffered, he was struggling with these verbal disruptions that was beyond his control. He could not control his behavior verbally, and also his physical, the active muscle movements due to the tic disorder. And one example of this was the constant repetition of fit, the word fit. During the trial, if you look at the recorded the trial, he repeatedly says feet during the trial process. So he further explained that he would involuntarily blurt out like profane languages, and also other offensive terms that he could not control himself. And Nelson testified that these behaviors, the muscle movements and also his vocalizations are all involuntary, that were hard to resist. And the expert testimony comes in. So the expert further explains that Nelson experienced both simple and complex motor tics, which are involuntary, sudden movements or sounds. So it wasn't willful action. So that's what the expert testimony how the expert testified in the court. And as a result, the court determined that the Nelson's non-compliance with the prescribed medicine did not satisfy the elements for deliberate action that would lead to criminal charges. So let me elaborate this a little bit. In this case, Robert Nelson, the defendant, was supposed to take the prescribed medication to mitigate his symptoms of Tourette syndrome, tic disorder, and he failed to take the medication at some point, and he claims that his failure to take the medication resulted into his criminal act. And the court determined that his failure to take the medication does not constitute either actus reus or mens rea, does not constitute elements of the crime. So the court decided that the Nelson's criminal act is not voluntary, so he got acquitted. So in this case, the court was very cautious in giving out the decision, because some other courts or other legal scholars may interpret the decision of the case as a blanket statement that that actions performed by patients who suffer from Tourette's syndrome is automatically involuntary, but the court says it's not. But in this specific case, the Nelson's act was involuntary, was not intentional. As I have explained previously, Tourette's syndrome is a very complicated condition that requires expertise from a wide range of fields, such as neurology, psychology, psychiatry, sociology, and education. And according to the United States versus Hall, the appellate court illustrated the importance of expert testimony in cases where defendants suffer these tic symptoms. And the court emphasized that expert testimony becomes even more important when the circumstances indicate that individual is suffering from tic disorder in addition to other psychological disorder. So I think it is very crucial to accept the expert testimony from the expert witnesses who are from wide range, who's from the wide range of different disciplines. And understanding the intricacies of the Tourette syndrome could also help avoid erroneous conviction. And future research on the Tourette syndrome should examine the causes of the criminal act and the convictions in individuals with the Tourette syndrome, in addition to the statements provided by various expert witnesses in the field, not limited to the hard scientific evidence, but also the soft scientific evidence, which is equivalent to the social scientific evidence. And enhancing general public's comprehension of the Tourette syndrome would lead to more effective treatment and avoidance of the dual stigmatizations of the patients/defendants who suffer from Tourette syndrome. And it is important for both the medical and legal professionals to acknowledge the vulnerability of this specific group of people, group of the Tourette's syndrome patients, and be aware of the potential for maltreatment within the justice system. From social perspective, it is important to assist organizations to educate the general public about the Tourette syndrome. For instance, in the United States, there's a nonprofit organization established by the general public to educate people about what Tourette syndrome is, what tic disorder is, and how they behave. And from a medical legal perspective, it is important to enhance awareness within the legal community regarding the nature of the Tourette syndrome and other associated symptoms, other psychological disorders. And the court, last but not least, the court should openly admit the expert testimony who could provide explanations on this diminished capacity, diminished legal responsibility issues, such as determining, as we have stated earlier in the Nelson case, whether the defendant acted intentionally or not, whether the defendant's criminal act was voluntary or not. I think I pretty much explained everything that I have written on my paper. If you want more specific details, you could always go to the website at the Research Institutes of Kookmin University and download the paper and read it. If you have any questions or concerns, please contact me. You'll be able to find my contact information, my phone number, email address on my paper. And yeah, that's it. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I hope to see you soon.